Once again, the Israelites sinned against God while living among the Philistines. They began to serve the false gods and idols of the Philistines, thus repeating their sinful pattern of behavior. Because of this, God gave them into the hands of the Philistines for 40 years. During this time, they suffered greatly under the bondage of the Philistines. God saw their suffering and heard their cries. One day, an angel of the Lord appeared to a woman who had no children and said, "You have never had a child, but you are going to become pregnant and have a son. When he is born, he must never cut his hair because he will be a Nazirite, set apart to God from birth, and he will begin the deliverance of Israel from the hands of the Philistines." The woman soon gave birth to a boy. She named him Samson. His father and mother did just as the angel of the Lord instructed, and never cut his hair to honor what God had commanded them. Samson grew, and the Lord blessed him. He could feel the Spirit of the Lord inside him. Unfortunately, Samson could be very stubborn and wouldn't always listen to his parents or seek the wisdom of God. This caused him to make many mistakes in his life that hurt him and his family. As he grew older, he saw a young Philistine woman in the town of Timnah. He thought she was very beautiful and told his parents to arrange for him to marry her. His parents begged him not to marry a Philistine woman since the Philistines worshipped other gods. But Samson insisted, so they planned a meeting with her parents. On their way to meet her parents, a young lion suddenly came roaring toward Samson. Instantly, the power of the Lord came upon him, and he tore the lion apart with his bare hands. Samson knew his strength was from the Lord, but he continued in his stubborn and selfish ways. Samson's parents arranged the marriage with the Philistine woman, but Samson caused such trouble to her family that her father gave her to another man. When Samson found out, he lashed out in anger, causing much harm to the Philistines. To appease their anger, Samson's own people tied him up and handed him over to the Philistines. The Philistines came rushing toward him, shouting in anger and ready to attack Samson. Again, the Spirit of the Lord came upon him. Samson's ropes became like melted wax and dropped from his hands. Then, seeing the fresh jawbone of a donkey lying on the ground, he picked it up and, filled with the power of God, struck down 1,000 Philistine men. After this, Samson was considered a leader among the Israelites. Sometime later, Samson fell in love with a woman named Delilah. The rulers of the Philistines never forgot what Samson did many years before, killing 1,000 Philistine warriors with the jawbone of a donkey. They went to Delilah and said, "See if you can lure him into telling you the secret of his great strength. Then we can overpower him and take him as our prisoner." They offered her 1,100 shekels of silver if she could find the secret to Samson's strength. The next day, Delilah said to Samson,
"Tell me the secret of your great strength. How can I tie you up so that you can't get loose?"
Samson answered, "If they bind me with 7 fresh cords that have not been dried, then I will become weak like any other man." Delilah told this to the rulers of the Philistines, and they soon brought her 7 fresh cords and hid in an inner room of her house. She bound Samson with the cords and then cried out,
"The Philistines are upon you, Samson."
But he snapped the cords as easily as a string that had touched the fire, so his strength was not discovered. Then Delilah said to Samson,
"You have deceived me and told me lies. Now please tell me how to tie you up so that you cannot get loose."
So he said, "If they bind me with new ropes that have never been used, then I will become weak like any other man." Again, the rulers of the Philistines brought her new ropes and then hid in an inner room of her house. Delilah tied him up with the new ropes and said,
"The Philistines are upon you, Samson."
And just like before, he snapped the new ropes from his arms like a thread. By this time, Delilah was very embarrassed and upset at how Samson kept tricking her about the secret to his great strength. She begged Samson,
"Each time you have lied to me and embarrassed me. Now please tell me the secret of your mighty strength.
This time he said, "If you weave 7 locks of my hair into a web, and then pin it to my head, I will become weak and be like any other man." That night, while he slept, Delilah took 7 locks of his hair and wove them into a web and fastened them on his head. Then she cried,
"The Philistines are upon you, Samson."
Samson woke up and easily pulled out the pins in the web of hair that had been braided together. By now Delilah was very upset with Samson and said,
"How can you say you love me when your heart is not with me? You constantly lie to me and deceive me, never telling me where your true strength comes from."
She continued to bother him day after day until finally Samson became so annoyed that he told her the truth. He said, "A razor has never touched my hair. I've been set apart as a Nazirite by God since my birth. If my head were shaved, my strength would leave me, and I would become as weak as any other man." When Delilah saw that he had told her everything, she sent for the Philistine rulers one more time. While they were hiding in an inner room of her house, she lulled Samson to sleep on her lap. While he was deep in sleep, a Philistine man quietly slipped in and shaved off all the braids on his head. Delilah cried,
"Samson, the Philistines are upon you."
But this time, when he got up to shake himself free, he soon realized that the mighty power of God was no longer with him, and his strength had left him. The Philistines then took Samson to the town of Gaza. They gouged out his eyes and put bronze chains on him and threw him in prison. Many sad and lonely months passed as Samson was put to hard work inside the prison. But during this time, his hair began to grow back. The Philistines were very happy that they had captured Samson and taken away his strength. One day, the Philistines gathered in the temple to worship their god Dagon, saying, "Our God has delivered our enemy Samson into our hands, the one who has slain so many of our people." They were in such high spirits that they called for Samson to come to the temple so they could tease and humiliate him. They made him stand between 2 pillars of the temple. Samson said to the boy who was leading him, "Place my hands on each of the pillars so that I can lean against them." The temple was full of men and women and all the rulers of the Philistines. About 3,000 people were watching and making fun of Samson as he stood between the 2 pillars. Samson called to the Lord and said, "O Lord God, please remember me and strengthen me one more time so that I can get revenge on the Philistines for my 2 eyes." Then Samson yelled, "Let me die with the Philistines." Bracing himself between the 2 pillars, he pushed with all his might, and the temple came crashing down on all the men, women, and rulers of the Philistines. In the end, Samson killed more people when he died than when he lived.